The day always started the same way. The hotel lobby smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish, and the sound of luggage wheels rolling across the marble floor filled the air. The janitor walked in quietly, wearing his faded blue uniform and carrying his old cleaning cart. No one really noticed him. He had become part of the background, like the hum of the air conditioner or the reflection in the shiny floors he spent hours polishing. He never minded the silence. He had grown used to it. Every day he swept the hallways, scrubbed the restrooms, and wiped the mirrors until they gleamed. Sometimes a few guests would smile politely or thank him in passing, but most of the time people walked by without a second glance. He didn't take it personally. Life had taught him that people rarely look closely at the ones who serve them quietly. His shift usually started before sunrise. The city outside was still sleepy and the hotel lobby lights shimmered like stars trapped indoors. He liked those early hours best. There was peace before the rush of guests began. He would hum softly to himself as he worked, lost in a rhythm that only he could hear. It wasn't any song in particular, just the habit of a man who once lived through music. Years ago, long before anyone in the hotel knew his name, music was his world. He had learned to play piano as a child on a small upright one his mother found secondhand. It was old and scratched, but to him it was magic. He spent hours practicing, losing himself in the sound of the keys. Back then he dreamed of big stages and shining lights. But dreams have a way of changing when life knocks too hard. When his father became sick, everything else had to stop. He took whatever jobs he could find, and music faded quietly into the background, just like he eventually did. Now, in this hotel, he worked with quiet dignity. He took pride in every corner he cleaned, every mirror he polished. Sometimes he would pause near the ballroom on the top floor. There, a grand piano sat under a white cover, untouched except for weddings or big events. Every time he passed it, he slowed his steps without even realizing it. He'd glance at it for a second too long before moving on, pushing his cart back toward the mop bucket and cleaning rags. No one knew that he had once been able to bring that instrument to life. The other hotel workers didn't pay much attention to him either. Some were friendly enough, giving him a nod or a quick smile. Others barely noticed when he was around. A few of the younger staff made jokes sometimes, whispering as he passed. He heard them once or twice, laughing about how he always looked so serious, always so quiet. But he never reacted. He just kept working, humming softly under his breath. That afternoon was like any other. A corporate event had taken place in the ballroom, and the guests had just left. The tables were messy with half-empty glasses, crumpled napkins, and forgotten name tags. The janitor entered quietly, as always, ready to do his work. He started clearing one table at a time, stacking plates, wiping surfaces, and emptying bins. The faint sound of city traffic drifted through the tall windows, mixing with the hum of the ceiling lights. As he cleaned, his eyes fell again on the grand piano standing at the far end of the hall. The white cover had been removed for the event, and the keys gleamed under the soft stage light. Something about it made him pause. He leaned on his mop handle and just stared at it for a few seconds. It had been years since he had touched one. His hands had grown rough from scrubbing floors and carrying buckets. He wondered if they would even remember what to do. He told himself to keep working. He wasn't here for that. He was just the janitor, and the ballroom needed to be spotless before the next event. But then the quietness of the room pressed on him. It was the kind of silence that begged to be filled with music. Slowly, almost without thinking, he walked toward the piano. He stopped halfway, looking over his shoulder. The room was empty. He could hear the faint sound of a vacuum cleaner from down the hall, but no one was nearby. He hesitated again. His heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something like longing. Then he reached out and lifted the piano lid. The polished wood reflected his tired face. He ran his fingers gently over the keys. They were cool to the touch. For a long moment, he just stood there, unsure if he should go on. Then softly, he pressed one key. The sound was pure and rich, echoing softly through the empty ballroom. His chest tightened. He pressed another key and another until a simple melody began to take shape. It was uneven at first, hesitant, like his hands were trying to remember something lost long ago. But soon the hesitation faded. The rhythm found him. His fingers started moving with more confidence, flowing across the keys in a pattern that felt both old and new. The melody filled the air, soft, graceful, and deeply human. It carried sadness, hope, and everything in between. His shoulders relaxed, and for the first time in years, a small smile touched his face. He forgot where he was. He forgot the mop bucket, the cleaning cart, and the faint smell of disinfectant. In that moment, he was somewhere else entirely. If anyone had walked in just then, they wouldn't have seen a janitor. They would have seen a man speaking through music, telling a story without words. Every note felt like a memory. Every pause felt like a breath between heartbeats. The ballroom seemed to glow a little warmer as the tune wrapped itself around the empty space. He didn't notice the time passing. The melody shifted from soft and slow to something more alive. A song that spoke of everything he had lost and everything he still carried inside. He could almost see his mother's face, smiling from the doorway of their old home, listening to him play when he was young. He could feel the years slip away as the music flowed through his hands like water. Then, as quietly as it began, he stopped. The last note hung in the air before fading into silence. He took a deep breath and lowered the piano lid gently. His hands trembled slightly. He looked around the ballroom, half expecting someone to have been watching. But there was no one. Only the faint sound of the city outside and the hum of the air vents above. He stood there for a moment longer, feeling both calm and heavy at the same time. The music had awakened something inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. He smiled faintly, then turned back to his cart and went back to cleaning as if nothing had happened. But inside, something had changed. The piano had reminded him that even when life takes everything away, it can't erase what's truly part of who you are. As he mopped the last corner of the ballroom, the faint scent of polish mixing with the echoes of his song, he didn't realize that someone had actually heard him. A waiter had passed by the hallway when the music started. He had stopped listening in disbelief but chose not to interrupt. He stood there until the last note faded, his eyes wide with surprise. When he finally returned to the kitchen, he couldn't stop thinking about what he had heard. By the time the janitor finished his shift and left the hotel for the night, word had already started to spread quietly among a few employees. No one knew for sure who had been playing the piano, but those who had heard said the music was unlike anything they'd ever heard before. The janitor, walking home under the dim streetlights, had no idea that his quiet moment alone would soon change everything. That night, he slept better than he had in a long time. His hands still tingled faintly as if the piano keys had left their mark. For the first time in years, he dreamed not of work or struggle but of music. He saw himself once again sitting before a grand piano, surrounded by light, and the sound of applause echoing softly in the distance. When morning came, he woke up with a peaceful smile, unaware that the world around him was about to see him differently. The next morning, the hotel was already alive with movement. Guests were checking out, suitcases rolled across the lobby floor, and phones rang nonstop at the reception desk. The janitor arrived quietly as always, with his cleaning cart squeaking softly as he pushed it across the tiles. He greeted the front desk clerk with a small nod and went straight to work. It was a routine he had followed for years, but something inside him felt different that day. He couldn't stop thinking about the piano. As he cleaned the windows and dusted the plants near the lobby, he kept hearing the sound of those keys in his mind. His hands remembered the way the piano had responded to his touch, the warmth of each note and the peace it brought him. For so long, his days had been filled with the sounds of mops, vacuums, and footsteps. But now, after so many silent years, he felt as if music had quietly slipped back into his soul. He tried not to show it, of course. He didn't want anyone to notice that something was on his mind. But deep inside, he carried a calm happiness that made even the simplest task, like polishing brass railings, feel lighter. He finished his morning shift faster than usual. When lunch break came, he sat alone on a bench behind the hotel. The breeze was cool, carrying the faint sound of traffic from the nearby street. As he unwrapped his sandwich, he closed his eyes and started tapping his fingers on his knee, replaying the melody he had played the night before. He didn't know that someone had been talking about him inside. The waiter who had overheard the piano music the previous evening had told a few co-workers. At first, no one believed him. The janitor? Playing the piano, they said with disbelief. But curiosity grew quickly. People started wondering who else could have been in the ballroom after the event. The music had been too beautiful for it to be a random guest. It was haunting, emotional, and professional, something that left a mark. By mid-afternoon, even the hotel manager had heard about it. He asked the event coordinator if any of the musicians had stayed behind to play, but she said no. The only person she knew was in the ballroom that late was the janitor who had been cleaning. The manager didn't say much but made a note to ask him later. Meanwhile, the janitor continued his shift, unaware of the quiet whispers spreading through the staff. He cleaned the elevators, checked the restrooms, and helped carry boxes for the maintenance team. Whenever he passed the ballroom, he couldn't help but glance toward the door. It was locked as usual, but he smiled faintly at the thought of what had happened inside it the night before. He didn't know it yet, but that simple moment of music was about to change everything for him. Late in the afternoon, while he was mopping near the front desk, the manager walked over. "Hey," the manager said kindly. "I heard some interesting news. Someone said you were playing the piano last night after the event. Is that true?" The janitor froze for a second, his mop still in hand. He looked down, unsure how to respond. He didn't think anyone had been around. He finally nodded slightly. "I played a little," he said softly. "Just for a few minutes," the manager smiled. "A few people heard it. They said it was beautiful. I didn't know you could play." The janitor shrugged with a small smile. "It's been a long time, I just missed it." The manager looked thoughtful. "You know, the piano in the ballroom hardly ever gets used except for events. You're welcome to play it when you're on your own time. Just make sure it's not during guest hours." He was surprised by the kindness in the manager's tone. He nodded gratefully. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate that." That evening, after his shift ended, he stayed behind again. The ballroom was empty and quiet, just like before. He approached the piano slowly, almost afraid the spell from last night might be broken. But as soon as he touched the keys, everything felt right again. He began to play softly, letting the notes drift like whispers across the empty room. This time he played a different tune. It was something simple but heartfelt, something he used to play for his mother when he was younger. The music filled the space with warmth. He closed his eyes and let himself get lost in it. His hands moved gracefully, even though they were rough and worn from years of hard work. The piano didn't care about that. It responded to feeling, not to perfection. What he didn't know was that the waiter had told the hotel's night receptionist to listen too. Curious, she quietly walked toward the ballroom and stood by the door. She didn't dare interrupt, but she listened with wide eyes and a soft smile. The music carried a kind of truth that words couldn't explain. When he finished, she slipped away quietly, her heart still full from what she had heard. Over the next few days, the story spread further. Guests began to whisper about the mysterious piano player in the hotel at night. Some of the staff started sneaking into the ballroom to listen from the back when they knew he was playing. They never clapped or said a word, they just listened. For those few minutes, the hotel's constant rush seemed to fade away. Even the air felt different when he played. He didn't mind if anyone listened. In fact, he didn't even think about it. For him, it wasn't about being seen or praised. He played because it made him feel alive again. The music gave him something no paycheck ever could, a sense of peace and purpose. One evening, as he played softly, he felt a presence behind him. He turned around to see the manager standing near the back of the ballroom, listening quietly. Embarrassed, he stopped playing and stood up quickly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The manager raised a hand. "No, please," he said. "Don't stop." That was incredible. He walked closer, looking impressed. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The janitor hesitated. "I studied music when I was younger," he said. "But I had to stop. Life got busy." The manager nodded slowly. "Well, you haven't lost it. You have real talent." The janitor smiled shyly, unsure what to say. Compliments were rare in his life, and he didn't quite know how to take them. The manager looked at the piano, then back at him. "We're hosting a dinner for some important guests next week," he said. "How would you feel about playing a short piece that night?" "Just background music during the meal. Nothing fancy." The janitor blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" he asked quietly. "Yes, you," the manager replied with a smile. "If you're comfortable with it." He didn't answer right away. Part of him felt nervous. He hadn't performed in front of anyone in years. What if he made mistakes? What if people laughed? But another part of him, the part that still remembered the joy of performing, felt something different. Excitement. Maybe it was time to share the music again. After a moment, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." Over the next few days, he practiced every night after his shift. He chose simple pieces, ones full of emotion rather than speed or show. Sometimes the staff would gather quietly outside the ballroom door to listen. Even the cooks and bellhops started timing their breaks so they could catch a few minutes of his music. For once, he wasn't invisible anymore. People greeted him by name, smiled when they saw him, and treated him with new respect. It felt strange at first, but it also warmed his heart. When the night of the dinner arrived, the ballroom looked beautiful. Golden light from the chandeliers reflected off the polished floors, and the guests talked softly at their tables. The janitor sat at the piano, dressed neatly in a clean shirt and pressed pants. His hands trembled a little as he rested them on the keys. He took a slow breath, looked around the room, and began to play. The first few notes floated through the air, clear and calm. Conversations faded as people turned to listen. The melody was gentle, carrying both sadness and hope. The guests watched quietly, surprised that the man they had seen cleaning the lobby earlier that week could play with such feeling. Even the staff stood at the edges of the room, proud and moved. When he finished the piece, the room was silent for a moment, and then soft applause filled the air. He smiled humbly and nodded his thanks. The manager clapped the loudest, his face glowing with pride. That night, as the janitor walked home under the streetlights, his heart was full. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. People had seen him, not just for what he did, but for who he was. And though he didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning. His music had touched something in everyone who heard it, and soon, the world beyond the hotel walls would come to know the quiet janitor who played the piano. The following week, the hotel still buzzed with talk about the dinner night. Everyone had been surprised by the janitor's performance. Some guests even asked the manager who the pianist was, assuming he had been hired for the event. When they found out he was the janitor, they were amazed. The story spread quickly, and soon, people who had missed it wanted to hear him play too. The janitor, however, didn't let it change him. Every morning he still came in early, pushing his cleaning cart down the same hallways. He still mopped, polished, and scrubbed the same way he always had. But there was something new in the way people looked at him now. The staff greeted him warmly, and the guests smiled when they passed by. Even the young workers who used to tease him now spoke with respect. It felt strange, but good. He didn't play the piano every night anymore, but sometimes when the ballroom was empty, he would sit and play for a few minutes. The music helped him breathe after long hours of work. It made him feel like himself again. He didn't care about attention or praise. He played because the piano spoke a language his heart still understood perfectly. One afternoon, while he was cleaning near the lobby, the manager approached him again. "There's something I wanted to ask you," the manager said. "A local news reporter called this morning. Someone told them about your performance last week, and they're interested in doing a short story about you. Would you be okay with that?" The janitor's eyes widened. "Me, a story?" he asked softly. The manager smiled. "Yes, just a small interview. They want to talk about your music and your life. It could be good for you and for the hotel." He hesitated. He wasn't used to attention. The idea of sitting in front of cameras made him nervous. But the manager seemed genuinely supportive, and he didn't want to seem rude. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly. "If it helps, I'll do it." A few days later, the reporter arrived with a small crew. They were friendly and respectful, setting up in the ballroom where the piano stood. The janitor wore his cleanest uniform and stood awkwardly near the piano, unsure of what to do with his hands. The reporter asked him simple questions about how he started playing, what music meant to him, and why he had stopped. He answered honestly, telling them about his childhood piano lessons, about his mother who always encouraged him, and about how life had pulled him in a different direction. He talked about working different jobs and finally ending up at the hotel. When the reporter asked how it felt to play again after so many years, his eyes softened. "It felt like remembering who I was," he said. "Sometimes life takes you far from yourself. But music, it finds you again." The reporter smiled, clearly moved. Then they asked him to play something for the camera. He hesitated at first, but sat down at the piano. The lights from the cameras reflected off the polished surface as he began to play. His fingers moved gently over the keys, filling the ballroom with a soft, emotional tune. The crew fell silent as they recorded. When he finished, no one spoke for a moment. Even the reporter seemed lost for words. A week later, the segment aired on local television. The story of the janitor who played the piano spread faster than anyone expected. Viewers were touched by his humility and talent. Comments poured in, calling him inspiring, pure, and real. People wanted to know more about him, his name, his story, his music. Some even visited the hotel hoping to hear him play in person. The manager was thrilled. "You've become a bit of a celebrity," he said one morning, handing the janitor a stack of printed letters that had arrived at the hotel. Some were from strangers who thanked him for reminding them of their own forgotten dreams. Others were from people who had once been musicians but stopped for various reasons. Many said his story gave them hope. He read each letter carefully, his heart full. He couldn't believe that something as small as him playing a piano after hours could touch so many lives. It made him realize how powerful simple things could be, how a few notes could carry warmth to people who needed it. Not long after, a music teacher from a nearby community center came to meet him. She had seen the news story and wanted to invite him to visit the center, where she taught children from underprivileged families. "We have an old piano there," she said kindly. "The kids would love to meet you and hear you play. Maybe you could talk to them about following their dreams." He didn't think of himself as a teacher or a speaker, but he agreed to visit. A few days later, he arrived at the small center, dressed neatly and feeling a bit nervous. The children were excited to see him. Some clapped when he entered the room. Others whispered to each other, recognizing him from the TV. The teacher introduced him and asked if he could play something. He nodded, sat down at the old piano and started a soft melody. The children grew quiet immediately. Their eyes followed every movement of his hands. When he finished, the room erupted in gentle applause. He smiled, feeling more at peace than he had in years. One little boy raised his hand. "Did you ever think you'd be famous?" he asked. The janitor laughed softly. "No," he said. "I never wanted to be famous. I just wanted to play." Sometimes we forget what makes us happy, but it's never too late to start again. He spent the rest of the afternoon answering their questions, sharing small stories from his life, and encouraging them to keep learning and believing in themselves. Before he left, the children gathered around him and one girl shyly handed him a small card. It said, "Thank you for reminding us to dream." He kept that card in his pocket long after. When he returned to the hotel, the staff greeted him with applause. They had seen the news story too. Even guests who didn't know him personally stopped to shake his hand or compliment him. The man who had once gone unnoticed was now someone everyone looked up to. But he didn't let it change who he was. He still arrived early every morning and cleaned every corner with care. The only difference was that now, when people looked at him, they saw more than just a janitor. Weeks passed and invitations started coming in. Local schools, community halls, even small cafes wanted him to perform. At first, he turned them down politely. He didn't think of himself as a performer anymore. But the manager encouraged him. "You have a gift," he said, "and people need to hear it." Eventually, he agreed to play at a small charity event organized by the city. The stage was modest and the crowd wasn't large, but when he sat at the piano, he felt the same peace he had always felt. The music flowed through him effortlessly. When he finished, the audience stood up in applause. A few people had tears in their eyes. After the show, a woman approached him. She said her father had been a janitor too, and had always dreamed of doing something creative but never got the chance. "You reminded me of him," she said softly. "You showed me that it's never too late." Her words touched him deeply. That night, as he walked home, the city lights flickered softly above him. He thought about how everything had changed since the first night he played in that empty ballroom. All he had done was follow a quiet feeling inside him, a need to play, to express something that words couldn't, and somehow, that small moment had grown into something much bigger than he ever imagined. When he reached home, he sat by his small window, looking out at the quiet street. He didn't think about fame or attention. He thought about the children, the people he had met, and the music that had brought them all together. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt like he belonged to the world again, one note at a time. And in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where he could keep doing what he loved, not for recognition but to remind others, just as he had reminded himself that beauty can still be found in the simplest corners of life. As the days passed, the janitor's life slowly began to change. The hotel still needed him to clean, but now his work was filled with something deeper. a quiet pride that came from being seen, not just for what he did, but for who he was. People no longer passed him by without notice. Guests smiled, staff waved, and the manager often asked how his music practice was going. He appreciated the kindness, but inside, he still stayed humble. He knew that fame could fade, but genuine kindness stayed forever. Every morning, he followed his usual routine. He polished the mirrors, swept the floors, and made sure everything was perfect before guests arrived. Yet, even as he worked, melodies played softly in his head. Sometimes he would catch himself tapping the rhythm of a song with his mop handle, or humming quietly as he wiped tables. The music had become a part of him again. One afternoon, a woman entered the hotel carrying a small violin case. She introduced herself as a music teacher from a nearby school. She told the manager she had seen the janitor's story on the news and wanted to meet him. When they brought her to him, she smiled warmly and said, "You reminded my students that music isn't about fame. It's about heart. We're organizing a small concert for children next month, and I would be honored if you would play the piano for them." He listened quietly, his eyes thoughtful. He had never performed for children before. The idea of standing in front of them sharing his story made him nervous. But then he remembered the faces of the children at the community center and how they had listened so carefully. Maybe this was something he was meant to do. After a moment, he nodded. "I would be happy to," he said softly. Over the next few weeks, he began preparing for the concert. After finishing his shift each night, he stayed behind in the hotel ballroom to practice. The music echoed through the empty hall, warm and alive. Sometimes the night staff would pause their work just to listen. They didn't clap or interrupt. They simply stood quietly at the back, letting the sound wash over them. He decided to play a mix of songs, some from his childhood and others he had written himself. They weren't fancy or complicated, but they carried feeling. He practiced until his fingers ached, not because he wanted to impress anyone, but because he wanted to give something honest. Music to him was a gift meant to be shared. When the day of the concert finally arrived, the small theater at the school was filled with excitement. The audience was mostly children, parents, and teachers. The stage was decorated with simple paper stars and colorful banners made by the students. The janitor sat quietly near the side of the stage, wearing a plain suit the manager had helped him borrow for the day. He felt nervous, but the sight of all those smiling faces calmed him. When his turn came, the teacher introduced him warmly. "This is a man who reminds us that dreams never really die," she said. He found his music again when the world had forgotten to listen. "Let's welcome him." The room filled with applause. He walked to the piano slowly, bowing his head slightly before sitting down. For a moment, he just looked at the keys, taking a deep breath. Then he began to play. The first song was gentle and hopeful, like a sunrise breaking through clouds. The children grew silent, their eyes wide, their small hands folded in their laps. He played another song, this one lively and playful, making the kids smile and tap their feet. By the time he finished his third piece, the entire room was clapping. Afterward, a few of the children came up to talk to him. One little girl asked, "Did you really used to clean floors?" He nodded with a kind smile. "I still do," he said, "but that doesn't stop me from playing music." Another boy asked if it was hard to learn piano. The janitor chuckled softly. "Everything is hard at first," he said, "but if you love something, it becomes worth it." The teacher thanked him again and said his music had inspired everyone. That night, as he walked home, he felt lighter than ever. He realized that it wasn't just about playing anymore. It was about sharing what he had learned in life. He had found meaning not just in music, but in connection. When he returned to work the next morning, something new awaited him. The hotel manager called him into his office with a warm smile. "I got a call from a guest," he said. "Someone who attended your school concert. They want to sponsor a small music event here at the hotel, and they specifically asked if you would perform." The janitor blinked in surprise. "Me? Again?" The manager nodded. "Yes, and this time they want to make it a charity event. The proceeds will go to buying instruments for children who can't afford them." The janitor felt his throat tighten. The thought that his music could help children in need touched him deeply. "Of course," he said quietly. "I'll do it." The next few weeks were filled with preparations. The staff helped decorate the ballroom beautifully. There were lights, flowers, and a banner that read, "Music for Hope." Everyone pitched in happily. The janitor practiced every evening, carefully choosing songs that told his story, pieces that spoke of struggle, hope, and the quiet beauty of never giving up. On the night of the event, the ballroom was full. Families, guests, and locals filled the seats. The janitor took a deep breath before walking to the piano. He looked out at the faces waiting for him and felt his heart swell with gratitude. He began to play, and the room grew still. Each note carried emotion, moments of pain, joy, and everything in between. He played not for applause, but for understanding. His music spoke of the nights he had worked alone, the dreams he thought he had lost, and the unexpected kindness that had helped him find them again. People listened with tears in their eyes. When the final note faded, the room erupted in applause. Some stood, others wiped their eyes. The manager, standing at the back, clapped the loudest. After the event, people came to shake his hand, thanking him for the performance. The donation box at the entrance was filled. The teacher from the school was there too, smiling proudly. "You've done more than play music," she said. "You've inspired a whole community." The janitor smiled humbly. "I just played what I felt," he said. "Maybe the music did the rest." Later that night, after everyone had gone, he stayed behind in the ballroom. The lights were dim, and the piano sat quietly on the stage. He walked over, sat down, and placed his hands on the keys once more. He played a soft tune just for himself. The music was gentle and full of gratitude. When he finished, he closed the lid and whispered, "Thank you," as if speaking to an old friend. When he stepped outside, the night was cool, and the city was quiet. He looked up at the stars and smiled. Life had taken him through so many turns, but somehow, it had led him back to the thing he loved most. And now his music wasn't just his own. It belonged to everyone it touched. Over the next few months, things continued to grow in unexpected ways. The charity event became an annual tradition at the hotel. Guests from far and wide came to attend. The janitor's simple act of sharing his gift had turned into something that brought people together. Each year he played new pieces, each one carrying stories of life, kindness, and second chances. But despite everything, the recognition, the smiles, the applause, he never changed. He still came to work early, still cleaned every corner with care, and still greeted everyone with quiet kindness. He believed that no matter how far music took him, he should never forget where it began. His story wasn't about fame or talent. It was about finding light in ordinary places. One evening, as he was locking up his cleaning cart, a young man approached him in the hallway. The man said he had been one of the kids at the first school concert years ago. He had grown up, studied music, and now taught piano to children. "I just wanted to say thank you," the young man said. "You showed me that music isn't just notes, it's hope." The janitor smiled warmly. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "That means more to me than anything." They shook hands, and for a moment there was quiet understanding between them. That night, as he finished his shift, he walked past the ballroom once more. The lights were dim and the piano waited silently. He paused, smiling at the sight. He didn't need to play tonight. The music already lived in his heart, and that was enough. He turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped out into the peaceful night, grateful for every moment that had led him here. Life had taught him that sometimes the world overlooks the quiet ones, the ones who work in the background. But every person carries something beautiful inside, something waiting to be discovered. For him, it was music. For others, it might be something else. But the truth was simple. It's never too late to shine in your own way, even if the world isn't watching. Years passed, and the janitor's story continued to ripple quietly through the lives of many. The hotel where he worked had changed in some ways. New faces, new decor, new management. But his presence remained the same. Every morning before the sun rose, he arrived with his cleaning cart, whistling softly. Guests who stayed long enough would hear him humming while he worked, unaware that the gentle man sweeping the floors had once played music that brought a room to tears. His days were simple, but full. He still played the piano after work, not for fame, but for peace. Sometimes the young staff would gather around and listen. Other times guests would wander in by accident and end up staying just to hear him play. He never asked for applause. When someone thanked him, he simply smiled and said, "Music is like breathing. You just let it happen." One morning, as he was cleaning the lobby, the manager, a young woman who had recently taken over, approached him. "I've been hearing stories about you," she said kindly. The previous staff told me about your music and all you've done for the hotel. I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to organize a little celebration for your years of service here." He looked up, surprised. "Oh, that's not necessary," he said modestly. "I just do my job," but the manager smiled. "It's more than that. You've inspired everyone here. We want to thank you properly." He tried to refuse, but she wouldn't take no for an answer. So he nodded and agreed, though he still didn't think much of it. For him, the joy was in doing his work and sharing music, not in being celebrated. The day of the celebration came quietly. The staff decorated the hotel ballroom again, the same one where his first performance had taken place years ago. There were flowers, photographs, and a simple banner that read, "Thank you for the music." The janitor was touched when he walked in and saw everyone gathered, clapping and smiling. They played a slideshow of photos, him cleaning, polishing, and of course sitting at the piano. He chuckled softly at the old pictures. When they asked him to say a few words, he hesitated. He wasn't used to speaking in front of people, but as he looked around at all the familiar faces, he found his voice. "I came here a long time ago," he began slowly, "just looking for a job. I thought I'd only be cleaning floors. But somehow life reminded me of the thing I loved most, and music. And it reminded me that no matter who you are or what you do, your gift will always find a way to reach the world. You just have to keep your heart open." The room fell silent. Some people wiped their eyes. Others smiled warmly. Then the manager handed him a small box. Inside was a silver keychain shaped like a piano, engraved with the words, "To the heart of the hotel." He held it gently, touched by the gesture. Later that night, after everyone left, he stayed behind in the ballroom once again. The piano sat quietly on the stage, and he couldn't resist playing a tune. He placed his hands on the keys and played something soft, a melody that carried memories of everything he had lived. The walls seemed to listen just as they always had. As time moved on, he grew older. His hands began to slow, and his steps weren't as quick as before. Yet his spirit never faded. The younger janitors who joined the staff admired his patience and work ethic. He taught them to take pride in small things: a spotless mirror, a shiny floor, a kind word. "Work done with care," he would say, "is its own kind of art." One winter evening, a familiar face walked into the hotel. It was the young man who had once been a child at the school concert long ago. He was now a music teacher, carrying a small group of his students who were performing nearby. When he saw the janitor, his eyes lit up. "You're still here," he said with a smile. The janitor nodded, surprised and happy to see him. "And you're still making music," he replied. They sat in the lobby for a while, sharing stories. The young man told him how that first concert had changed his life. "You made me believe that music could come from anywhere," he said. "Even from someone who others didn't notice. I wanted to be that kind of teacher." The janitor smiled softly. "Then I think you've already done more than I ever did," he said. The young man invited him to the students' concert that evening, and though the janitor hesitated at first, he eventually agreed. He sat in the back of the small auditorium, listening as the children played. Their music was innocent, sometimes uneven, but full of heart. He closed his eyes and smiled. It reminded him of his younger days, the wonder of discovering music for the first time. After the show, the children surrounded him. The teacher had told them who he was. "You're the janitor who played for the whole town," one little boy said excitedly. He laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'm just someone who loves the piano," he said kindly. That night, as he walked home under the quiet sky, he thought about how life had come full circle. He had started as a janitor cleaning floors, found his music again, shared it, and somehow inspired others to find their own. He realized that even though the world might not always notice the quiet ones, their light still reaches far. Months later, as spring arrived, the hotel decided to hold one more Music for Hope event. The manager asked if he would like to play again. He smiled gently. "Maybe this time," he said, "I'll let the younger ones play." He still helped organize everything, setting up chairs, tuning the piano, guiding the children. On the night of the concert, he sat in the front row, watching proudly as others performed. When one of the kids played one of his old tunes, he felt his eyes grow misty. After the final applause faded, the young teacher came up and said, "They learned that piece from a recording of you. We wanted you to hear how they've made it their own." The janitor couldn't find words for a moment. Then he said softly, "That's how music should be. Passed on, not kept." As the years went on, he finally decided to retire. The staff threw him a small farewell gathering. There were laughter, hugs, and memories. He was given a framed photograph of him at the piano, signed by everyone in the hotel. "To the man who showed us that every job has music in it," the note read. On his last night at the hotel, he took one final walk through the halls. He touched the walls gently, remembering every corner he had cleaned, every note he had played. The ballroom door was open and he stepped inside. The piano was still there. He sat down one last time and played a simple, peaceful tune, the same melody he had played when he first found the piano years ago. When the song ended, he sat quietly for a while, listening to the silence. Then he smiled, stood up, and turned off the lights. As he walked out, he whispered, "Thank you for letting me play." In the years that followed, the hotel continued to tell his story. Guests would ask about the man who once played the piano after cleaning. The staff would smile and say, "He was our janitor, but he taught us more about life than anyone." The piano remained in the ballroom, always polished, always ready. Sometimes, during quiet evenings, someone would sit down and play his favorite melody, a song that had become a part of the hotel's heart. And though the janitor no longer worked there, his music lingered. It lived in the air, in the laughter of guests, in the kindness of staff who remembered him. He had left behind something more lasting than fame, a reminder that beauty can bloom anywhere, even in the quiet work of cleaning floors, and that no dream is ever too small or too late to live again. Some say that on calm nights, if you stand near the ballroom, you can still hear faint notes floating through the air, soft, gentle, and full of soul. Maybe it's just the wind through the old building. Or maybe it's the echo of a man who once loved a piano so deeply that his music never truly stopped.